Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thank you for joining me for the podcast where personal stories can have a global impact. As you heard in the intro, my guest today is Tammy Goen, the Calm Coach. Tammy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. So, we're going to discuss a topic that's more personal than most of my topics. We're going to discuss what it means to be a highly sensitive person, an HSP. And I describe myself as an HSP. Being a highly sensitive person means you feel things more deeply than most people. You pick up on little details, changes in tone, or moods in a room that others might miss. Things like loud noises, bright lights, or busy environments can feel overwhelming, and you may need more downtime to recharge. At the same time, you often experience beauty, art, and kindness more intensely, and you tend to be very empathetic and caring towards others. That's what we're going to be talking about today. So, my first question for you today, Tammy, is how did you come to be called the Calm Coach? And what led you into coaching, especially for HSP?
Well, the leading into the coaching piece. So I initially knew I wanted to help people with emotional stuff. I just knew that from the get-go, and so I got a master's in counseling, and I hit that road right away. And I worked with a lot of survivors of a variety of different kinds of abuse, and I didn't know at the time that I was highly sensitive. I like the term highly sensing versus sensitive just because it's got a less of a bad rap. That idea of sensitivity sometimes is a little much, but so I'll use sensing as well. But I wasn't aware of that as a trait. Of course, I always knew I was sensitive, as all sensitives are. It's like, oh, I've always been this way, of course, but I didn't realize that it was a trait that other people shared. And I didn't orchestrate my career in such a way that was workable for me. I thought I was doing really great. People would say, oh, don't you get burned out? And I said, oh, no, I leave it at the office and I don't take it home with me. And then one day I hit a wall and I just did not feel I could hear one more story, one more issue that I was obviously taking on when I didn't think I was. So I did reach a point where I stopped doing that work, and I went into massage school and I learned massage and energy work, and I did that for a long time. But I was really missing that piece, that emotional connection piece. And so that's when I shifted into coaching. And around that time, I think, as you had mentioned when we were talking off camera, I think that someone had mentioned, oh, you should check this thing out, high sensitivity. And so I had a friend that was supporting me through a challenging time that I was having with a friend and my business partner at the time. And he said, yeah, check this out. And it was 16 traits of highly sensitive people. And so, of course, I pull up that and I check off, yes, 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 yes. That's okay. That's me. And what is this high sensitivity thing? That's totally me. And I needed to find out what that was. So I took a deep dive and then discovered, as you're probably aware, that all of these things that happened in my life and all the challenges I had with communication and people understanding me, there was a basis for that. And it was a whole new perspective on my life. And so from that point, as I was getting more back into the helping through that emotional arena, working with people, coming to recognize that the majority of people that were finding me were also sensitive. So, initially it was, hey, have you come across this? Are you familiar with this? And then of course they would have these aha, moments like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. That sounds totally like me. And then I realized that was really a niche that was not being filled, because people would say, you know what, I've had counseling, I've had coaching, but I felt like it only could get so far without being truly understood. I just kept hearing these things that I was supposed to be able to do, or, just not really feeling like they got me. So it's a big difference when someone understands where I'm coming from. So I realized that would be, a focus for me to help other HSPs to come to an understanding of who they are based on that trait of sensitivity, and be able to honor who they are as sensitives, and then really to go through that process of turning that sensitivity into their superpower that it really, because that it really is, as you were talking about all the benefits of being able to see all the different sides of things and all the little details and experience things at such a deep level which can be very challenging, but they can also be so rewarding.
Yeah,
So
I don't
that's
want you
how
to go
that
too deep into
became.
that because I'm going to ask you specifically about that a little bit
Yeah.
later. But one of the things you just said that I liked is sensing rather than sensitive. As I've learned about my own personality, as I've gotten older, I didn't even know what I'd never even heard of HSP until I was about 40 years old when I read Dr. Aaron's
Hmm.
book. And people, when I mentioned it to some people, they said, "Does that mean you cry all the time?" Like, no, that's not the kind of sensitivity I'm talking about. I probably cry more than most people, but that's not what it's about. The sensing part, I think I probably like that word a little bit better. And being a man is even more challenging. Being a black man is even more challenging than being a man with sensitivity. So it's not an easy thing to navigate. It's not anything that I would change because I think it gives me a stronger emotional bond with people I've never even met before. I can be in a
Definitely.
place with somebody and I can sense if somebody is having a bad day,
Hmm.
and because I care enough to go and just say, "Are you having a bad day?" or "Can I do something to help you?" I think we need more of that in the world.
We absolutely need more of that. And, that is very helpful for everyone that you encounter. And it's obviously a positive side of sensitivity or being highly sensing. And yet, if you don't have all the things in place to be taking care of yourself and calming your nervous system and being in an okay place with that, then you could see that as a detriment or as a challenge, because like, oh, I'm so aware of all these people's feelings and what they're always needing. And it's like a drain. So if you have the right tools, then that's like, I can use this to help so many people and so many situations as long as I'm taking care of me and I can manage that. So there's that piece of, being able to acknowledge it and see that as a positive, which is great. And then not having that be something that drains you.
Well, we're going to be talking a lot about that today, I hope, because I need some strategies. This time in United States and world history has been overwhelming. I don't mind saying that. It has been overwhelming for me. There have been times in the last couple of weeks when I've described it to my wife like I feel like my brain is dysfunctional. It feels like I'm going to explode. There are just so many things coming at me at one time. It's just so learning some coping strategies. I would appreciate that opportunity. All right. So my next question for you is: what are some of the biggest obstacles that you have faced when building your coaching business, and how do you overcome those?
In building the business itself.
The coaching business.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've had to manage myself, and then I help clients to manage also, is that we, as sensitives, tend to have maybe a higher proclivity toward the, being a charlatan, or, like, oh, maybe I don't really know everything that I think I do. And well, who am I to put myself out there, and all of that. And then being in a leadership position, I worked with a client who specifically, that was one of her main topics, was like, I'm in this position. They asked me to be in this role. I've been here for a couple of years. I have no idea why I'm here because I'm not a leader. So we spent a lot of time talking about, what is a leader to her? What is the concept of leadership in the greater scheme of things? If you look at you in the US in particular, what do we expect as someone who's successful in business as a leader? A lot of that stuff is, if it's not, it doesn't work for us. But are there other ways of being a leader? Absolutely. And if you're using those things that resonate with you, then they're going to be very powerful. So some of that, getting past the piece of, I don't know, who am I to be sharing all this stuff with everybody? I'm just a little peon. I'm just this little person. And part of it is also recognizing that what is common or simple or understood for me is because of all the things that I've done to get to where I'm at, versus someone who comes in to, ask me these questions or to work with me or to, to see things in a new way. And I have all this stuff to contribute. It's not that it's not important or overly simple. It's just that I've come to this place where it is that way for me now. So I can impart that knowledge, to someone else and help them develop those tools and understandings and abilities as well. So I think those were the most challenging for me in terms of building that business, and even, deciding to reach out, just having that niche of just focusing mostly on working with sensitives, because I get it. And a lot of the things that we talk about are just like, yeah, I totally get it. And I understand where to go with that because I've taken that journey and that road. And for some, it's like a total, especially if they've just discovered, you remember what that was like when you said, oh, wait, what's this sensitivity thing? Well, hold on. If you're just learning about that, then it's a lot to be adding this new perspective of life in general, of you as a person and how you interact with everybody in the world. It can be a lot, in itself. So being able to honor those things, and in my case too, honor that, yeah, I'm a sensitive and these are the ways that my sensitivity shows up, and what can I harness, and what can I, adjust based on, okay, so I need these tools and these tools to help me manage that. And then I can use it for good rather than expecting it to turn out a certain way based on what the main view is of success, or being an entrepreneur, or whatever. And learning to do those things in a very calm, gentle way. What most recently, one of my big walls that I hit was I was trying to build the business and doing the things, all the stuff that, like, so many business coaches would say, oh, well, you have to do this and this, and then all the marketing and all of the social media piece, and, this, and this. Oh, and you have to do more of this and more. And I got completely burned out because I was doing all these things that didn't resonate. They were the things I was supposed to be doing, listening to culture and the typical business world, instead of like, does this resonate for me? Does this work for me? And then acknowledging it really doesn't. So I'm going to pare down some of these things, and I'm going to focus on only the things that make sense for me. And a lot of that is based on my sensitivity. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff that does not resonate for me.
Okay. So, how do you define sensitivity, and what are some common misconceptions that people might have toward sensitivity?
Well, and as you mentioned, there, the main thing is really about depth of processing. So I refer to it as like we're giant sponges without all the filters that other people might have. So we have all the stuff coming in all the time, and we don't differentiate, like, oh, these are little things, I'm just going to let them go. It's like that comes along with all of the stuff that's big and major as well. So it might be a huge thing that just happened across the country. It might be something that happened in your town that someone might say, like, oh, that's not a big deal, don't worry about that. But as a sensitive, that goes into your bucket, all of those things that become so much bigger. And as I've started heading out that direction, I've lost part of your question. So if you could
So,
remind me.
what are some common misconceptions about sensitivity?
So of course, we hear growing up, we're too, fill in the blank, we're too sensitive, too, well, for men especially, too feminine or too weak, or man up, right? I'm sure you heard that, all those terms that are referencing that particular area. But most of the time it tends to be, the misconception is we're less than or too, weak to be able to manage things, just because there's an inherent fault, versus being wired in a different way. Our brains are actually wired differently, and we are made that way to bring in all of this stuff that other people aren't necessarily paying attention to. So there's that idea that it's like a choice, right? That's a big misconception. Oh, well, just don't be so sensitive anymore. Like, we can just turn it off. Or that we're, dramatic, or just crybabies because we want attention. Those are some really common misconceptions. And that it's easy to just turn that off, to just say, I'm going to do things a different way because this isn't working. So I'm going to be a different person. So people can kind of expect that from people. And then after a long time of hearing these things, we can think that ourselves. Like, I just need to figure out how. I mean, that's the most common question or request that I have for people starting to work with me. Is this, at the beginning, they'll say, can you just not make me so sensitive? And that makes me sad sometimes, actually, because as you pointed out, there's so many positives. And if we dialed down that sensitivity, we would miss all of that is positive. But it's not a matter of becoming less sensitive or somehow turning that off. It's learning how to manage what that means, and that we recognize that we don't have to change who we are as sensitive. We can just help people understand us better and create our environment so that it resonates for us, and make those decisions and choices that help us out, but we don't have to change who we are. So I think those are some of the most common. And that it's women only. That's a very common one too. It's like, oh, that's just, women are so sensitive, and that's just extra, extra sensitive, and you need to figure that out. It's like, and men can't be, you know, extra sensitive, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So you co-authored the book Evolving on Purpose. So how does that work tie into or inform your coaching methodology? Can't even say the word today.
For me, the idea of connecting with my purpose on the planet as I see it, helping other, sensitives who are overwhelmed and tired of being misunderstood and not feeling heard and feeling like they need to change, to reach a place of calm so that they can manage the things and things aren't so overwhelming. And then they can come to honor themselves and be able to ask for their needs and explain themselves in a way that's heard. All of those things, I think, are part of my journey of understanding myself, learning how all that works, and then helping others so that they don't have to, hopefully I can catch people before, they were my age or your age of learning that. But I'll get people that I work with that are, 65, 70, and they'll say, oh, if I'd only known this, back, whenever. But it's never not an okay time to find out, because you just get to have that understanding and acceptance of yourself as a person who's wired in a certain way. And so my journey of helping, first finding self-love and honoring within me, and then helping others to do that, rather than just sitting back and just being, in my own space and my own journey, but being able to share that with others so that they don't have to struggle as much.
All right. So what are some? Sorry, I'm starting to fight off a cold here. But this is the editing process that we're thankful for, that nobody will ever hear all this coughing I'm doing. So, what are some daily practices or routines you recommend to sensitive people to maintain an emotional balance and prevent burnout?
So the first step of not even doing anything, but like a mindset is, first acknowledging that fact that you are wired differently, and there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with your sensitivity. It's just, it's like being left-handed, right-handed. What you just happen to be, I'm right-handed, but some people are left-handed. They just happen to be that way. I happen to be wired in a certain way, sensitivity wise, and that's that. So acknowledging that first. So anytime you run into someone saying something about how you need to be different or you shouldn't be so sensitive or whatever, just reminding yourself, I'm this way for a reason, and it's non-negotiable. I am this way. That's okay. And now I can calm myself. So the first would be breathing and having a plan to do some kind of breathing. You can do it for just even a minute, but multiple times throughout the day, and specifically when you find yourself, starting to amp up, or your mind's in a spiral with, all the what ifs and the I should have done this and the guilt and just all that stuff. Be able to stop yourself and say, oh, I'm just going to have a little mini reset. And if you're in a place where you can, close your eyes if that's comfortable, or, kind of gaze off and just focus on the breathing for, a minute, 30 seconds, if that's all you've got, but, a few cycles of the breathing, just doing nothing but paying attention to the breathing. So nothing has to change. You don't have to do anything. If you feel like you want to, on each exhale, just say, I'm going to release stuff as I exhale. You can certainly do that, but just taking that time periodically throughout the day to do some breathing, because every time you do that, you're back into the moment, and then the squirrel cage, the whatever, everything stops, the monkey brain, all of that. You just like, okay, let me reset for a moment. And then it's really good to ask yourself to check in periodically to see how you're doing, because we can be focused on all the different things, helping everybody, doing all the things we think we should be doing, and not checking on ourselves. And I like to use, like, if you have like a little sticky note or something that you can put in your bathroom that says, check or whatever, but have it in there so that you see it every time you go to the bathroom. And the reason for that is that you do that multiple times a day, and you're going to go in there and see that and go, oh, okay, yeah, let's do that now. And it forces you in a way to say, oh, it's time to do that. I wouldn't have thought of it on my own. Okay. And then be really honest and say, how am I doing? Okay, wow. And you can do like a scale of 0 to 10, where 10's like over the top. 0 is I am beyond calm. I can't even imagine being any more calm. That would be 0, and just check in and say, okay, how am I doing? How am I feeling? And maybe you're like at an 8. Things are just kind of feeling a little out of control and whatever. And you say, okay, take a deep breath. What do I need right in this moment to feel a little bit better? And maybe it's some breathing. Maybe it's, I need to go put my stuff on hold for a minute, take a walk around the block, or go walk to the river, or some kind of a reset. Or maybe it's, I just said yes to one more thing today, and I realized that just put me over the edge. I need to step back and say, you know what, I need to do that tomorrow or another time, or whatever it is that you actually be honest with yourself. What will help me feel better right now? And then take steps toward that. So those are
Right.
some important ones.
Okay, that's a way of sort of checking ourselves, being self-aware. But how can an HSP communicate their needs more effectively in relationships or at work?
So I think, like generally speaking, the best way of communicating is using I statements and feelings and putting things out as they are rather than doing any kind of blaming. So being real clear that, I am feeling frustrated right now with whatever it is. And then you can, depending on how you feel, what your connection is with that person, you can clue them into being sensitive and what that means. Or if you think that's too much or they're not going to hear or whatever, just identify what those needs are. So you can say, the way I process things, you don't have to say I'm highly sensitive and that means. You can just say the way I process things, I need some time to be able to work through everything and make a really good plan so that I don't have to backtrack at some point. Or the way this stuff is coming into me is a lot right now, and I need whatever it is to work through this in a certain way. Or it's not necessarily your intention, but when I hear you say whatever that is, I feel that physically, in my body. I feel the energy coming off of that, and that's really challenging for me. So it would help me if, whatever that scenario would be, but really speaking to what your own actual needs are and what your reactions are, because we can have a tendency to assume that everyone would get that because that's the way we operate, and that's definitely not always the case. So if we just assume, well, I'll just say, oh, I need this, that they'll understand why. And that's not, it's likely to not be the case. So we have to stand up for ourselves by sharing exactly what it is that we're experiencing and what we need. And we don't have to go on and on and on about it. And we don't even have to say it's because I'm sensitive, or, hey, have you heard of high sensitivity? That's me. And, so if you know someone really well and you have that time, that's great. If you can say, hey, do you know this? In fact, when I had my friend say, oh, you should check this thing out, this situation I was dealing with my two people, but with my business partner in particular, once I discovered the traits, I took that inventory that I had taken, where I checked off all the boxes, and I printed it off and handed it to her and said, would you take a minute and look at this? And she did. And then she's like, okay. And I said, I checked off all but one of those, as that's life for me. And she, deer in the headlights, she's like, this and this and this and this one too. And I'm like, yep, that's how I feel and approach life and why things affect me the way they do. And then that opened up a conversation for us to explain, what I was going through based on these pieces of me that are different than her and how her perception was. And so we were able to have that conversation. So if you know someone well enough, that's a great way to do it, to be able to say, hey, can you check this out for a minute? And then explain, this is me, and let me tell you what that's like. And then we can talk about how we can interface in a way that is healthy for both of us. But sometimes we don't know someone well enough, or we think that that'll just give them more ammunition, so to speak, or more stuff to be complaining about or whatever. So we don't necessarily need to say, I'm sensitive, I'm highly sensitive, and that's what this means. We can just say, hey, the way I see things, the way I process things, the way my brain works, whatever. This is how I see things, or this is what helps me. Or I know some people can sit in this office space and just ignore all the things around them, but the way my brain works, all of those things come in at once, and so it's really challenging for me to focus on my task when all of these things are going around. So if there's a place that I can work that's a little quieter, that doesn't have all the bright lights, that kind of stuff, we can work through some of that, in that way. But we can't do it without being upfront and honest, and having people just kind of figure it out or guess, because it's not going to happen.
How do you help clients distinguish between genuine intuition from their sensitivity and fear or self sabotage?
That's a really good question. The biggest way is to spend some time, and if people aren't used to meditating or being quiet, which is something to definitely work toward, to be able to be in those spaces. But if they're not in touch with their bodies, especially acknowledging what happens, we all tend to have some kind of visceral or, cognitive sometimes, like if you think about clairaudience and claircognizance and all of those kinds of things, they're things that we're aware of on some sensory level. So sometimes most of the time you can find something in your body. Sometimes it's more like, oh, I have these flashes, or, something like that. But identifying what it is, how it is that you react when it is intuition, when you are hitting something right on, and you pick up out an example of some time when you were listening to your inner wisdom that said, oh, I think this is not a good idea, and you went with it and you were right. So pick an example that you can say when it was a positive thing, when you knew this is a person I'm really going to connect well with. What kind of sensations did you have in your body? Was it warm and fuzzy, or you just couldn't stop smiling, or you just had this knowing of like, that feels really settling and calming, or there's a specific thought. If there's not a body sensation, some kind of thought, like immediate, it's whatever's immediate, that immediate response, rather than I'm going to think about it. Oh, I think it's this. So whatever that immediate response is, especially if it's in the body, and if it's something that's not good, we tend to have things like, your gut clenches, or your jaw clenches, or you get, some kind of really heavy feeling, or something that feels, kind of yucky. We'll tend to have those kind of responses if we clue in with our bodies and say, okay, and even if it's like making a decision, okay, if I say yes to this, how does that feel? Sit with that for a minute, and you say, if I say yes, and then if your body goes, then that's your intuition saying, want to rethink that. Not a good idea. But if it's like, I always know I have made the right decision, or that I'm seeing things correctly when I get little tingles all over, and that's my sign of like, oh yeah, I'm right on. Okay, and I'm going to listen to that.
Your
So that's the
senses.
yeah, exactly. And sometimes it's just a knowing. Sometimes people don't have that body connection, but it's just, you just have that knowing, like suddenly, like, and I don't know why. And if somebody said, well, why is that the person you want? And you might say, I have no idea. But if it was there immediately, then that's the intuition. The fear tends to be, not that you can't have body reactions to fear also, but fear is usually like we're stuck up in some kind of cycle in our minds, going over and over and over it, or having something, what if, or a lot of yeah buts, or whatever, tend to circle in. Or it's over a period of time, like the more you think about it, the more you're concerned and you're worried, and we can have that idea of like, well, maybe I'm making that up, right? But if it came almost immediately, or like instantaneously, like as soon as I thought of that, I just knew it was okay, because I was paying attention to my body, or those sensations came along. It's pretty much just, it's cut and dry, but it takes a while sometimes, if we're not used to that, to clue in and listen to our intuition. And so things like breathing or meditation, the times where we can be really quiet and get used to tuning in to ourselves. And I think one practice is good that's a mindful practice just in terms of calming our nervous system, but also helps us to learn to pay attention, is to actually do a sensory meditation where you just pay attention to a sound or a physical sensation, like where you're sitting, the air, the temperature, that kind of stuff. Or if you're doing the sound, you say, okay, what's one thing I can hear in the room right now? Okay, I hear the clock ticking. What is that like? It's really staccato, obviously, but maybe it's muted or it's really sharp or something about that sound. And then you pick another sound and you're like, okay, well, what is that? What does that particular sound like? And really focus on those and pay attention to those kinds of things. We can kind of train ourselves to be more aware in the moment, shut out all the other stuff and say, oh, what am I noticing? And then we can do that for our body. Say, okay, I'm going to do a body scan where I start at the top and just visualize, feel, sense everything all the way down slowly through the whole body and just say, what am I experiencing? What am I feeling? And then after you've done that whole thing, pick something that you know is not okay for you. You know that you made that decision and that was good, but if you did that, so pick something that you know you're likely to have a negative experience with, and then say, okay, now that I've gone through this, I know what's going on with my body. Now I think about this, what happens? And then see what your body does. Say, oh, well, compared to just a moment ago, my solar plexus area seems really tight. Okay, and then be aware of that and then check that out other times, and that might be your cue, and you can practice becoming more aware by just doing that kind of fine-tuning. Say, I'm paying attention to these sounds, or what my skin feels like with my pants over the top, and what the seat that I'm sitting on, and the air current in wherever I'm at, those kinds of things. Just paying attention so that we're becoming more and more aware so that we can listen when we get those messages.
Okay. Well, are HSPs more likely to have imposter syndrome? Is there any correlation between those two things?
I haven't seen any actual research data on that, but I would say yes, because one of the things that happens with sensitives is we tend to be more likely to want everything to be just right, not step on anybody's toes, not offend anybody, make sure everyone's happy with us. And then we take in so much of that, everything else around us, and we tend to make a lot of comparisons. Like, wow, I see all the things that these people do and all the things that these people do, and then I have the things that I do. And if we come from a place of feeling misunderstood and that people don't get us, I think it's easier to be in that place of going, maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. Or, what gives me the go ahead to just say, hey, I'm going to be the mentor or the person that people are going to go to for this thing, because I've learned all this and I'm in this place. But then we have that moment of like, well, what if but we play the what if game so much more, I would say, than non-sensitives, that we can just consider all of the different things, and we want everyone to be good with us. So if we think, well, someone's gonna think otherwise or whatever, so maybe I should just not say anything. So yes, I think it's more likely for some of those reasons of just wanting everything. Client I'm working with right now, she keeps coming back to this idea that I just want everything to be right, which means I have to do everything. I have to be in charge of everything and oversee everything and make sure, all that, because it has to be just right, which, you can't be everything for everyone all the time. We can't.
All right. You touched on this early in the conversation about having sensitivity be viewed as a superpower. Let's go into that some more. How can highly sensitive people use their sensitivity as a superpower?
So as long as we're acknowledging and honoring that that's who we are, and then we can go forward from there, and we're not pulling back and thinking, I can't be this sensitive, or I can't see these things this way. So if we say, no, wait, I can see things that other people can't, or just aren't aware of. I'm aware of so many more things. I can process a lot of things at once. Yes, that can lead to overwhelm, so you have to do it in the right way, but I can process all these things. I can come up with these. So in a work environment, we tend to be really good with, project management kind of things, because we can say, this person's best doing that. This person's really on for this, and this person really needs this to do, so you can see all of how everything works and creating a team that can work well together, and being able to, like you said, knowing, like, wow, somebody is really needing this extra thing today, or I can really feel someone's energy and emotions right now, and I can tell that they need a little bit of a break, or there's those kinds of things, and our level of compassion tends to be up a notch or two, so we're more likely to say, I'm going to do something about this, instead of just letting them take care of it themselves. Not that we have to be everything for everyone all the time, but we can use that to say, oh, I'm going to step in here and help this situation, because I get a sense of what can happen. And that doesn't mean we have to take care of it all. We can go to our supervisor, or we can go to the team and say, hey, I'm noticing this. I'm thinking this might help. What do you think? So we can see things that way. We tend to be very creative, and if you look at artists and writers and musicians and actors, all the people that are in the creative space, there's a much higher percentage of sensitives in that realm. So we can use that creativity. We can use it in work. We can use it in creative outlets. We can do, art and music and those kinds of things, and really get a lot of return for ourselves from them. We can really get a lot out of it. So using our creativity, and then in relationships, being able to put ourselves in someone else's shoes. We're really good at doing that. Sometimes people aren't as good at being able to see that other side. We can see like all the sides usually. So that can help us, as long as we can stand up for ourselves and make our needs known and learn how to do that communication. We tend to be very good business partners, personal partners, friends. We can be very loyal, all of those things that help us be, good friends and have good relationships, as long as, again, we're standing up for ourselves and making sure that we're heard and we don't get walked on. We have to, pay attention to that. But if we're using all of those things that allow us to see the world so much more in detail and in depth, it gives us so many things, to work with. And usually we are the canary in the coal mine, as a lot of people will say. We do notice those things right off that might get missed, that actually can be a safety feature. We can keep things okay, whether it's emotionally or physically, that we can say, something's not right here. And then we act on that. Then we can, resolve things quickly or prevent something from happening sometimes. So if we really listen to and honor those parts of us, they can be very, very helpful. And because we do process things more deeply and we see all the sides and all that kind of stuff, we tend to get more out of things like coaching and counseling, or anything where we would go to, like sound healing and, all these things that are supposed to be for wellness and mental health and those kinds of things. If we use those things, we tend to get even more out of them than average. So we can really help ourselves well if we allow that, just because we process that stuff so much more. We get all that added value.
When you were talking about the list of creative professions, more likely to be HSPs, writing was one of them. Being a writer was one of them, and I'm a writer, so that's
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely consistent. But my sensitivity, I believe, makes me a better writer, because I'm able to imagine details of
Yes.
things. I can not just see things in my mind, I can feel things. I can
Mm-hmm.
smell things. It's almost an eerie sensation sometimes, but it definitely helps when you're writing something that's you're creating from nothing, literally.
Yeah, and if you have a favorite writer that sometimes you're reading, you go, how in the world? And a lot of times other people, especially if they're not as sensitive and they don't see things that way, it's like, how do they ever come up with such a thing? And that you just like center, go within, and stuff just comes, right? Because, whether it's because of all of the stuff that you've processed so far in your life and you have such a huge, pool to pull from, or because your creativity level is so high that you can just create these things. And if you're a spiritual person, you can say, you can get downloads, or you can just get this stuff from, the cosmos, from higher power, however you see that, because you are open. If you allow those channels to be open and you bring in so much stuff, you can make that connection maybe more deeply or more easily. And so that, there's all these different ways that all that stuff comes in. But yeah, having more, again, being like that sponge where all that stuff comes in, and then less, fewer filters, keeping that stuff out, allows all that positive stuff to come in and flood you more likely also.
So let's talk about you personally. After a long day of coaching and helping others find their calm, what's your go-to way of recharging? Is it like snacks, TV shows, music? What's your go-to thing?
If I'm talking just like end of day in the evening type thing, I'm an avid reader. So I've always got a book going, and that's one of my ways to just kind of decompress. Music is a huge thing, and nature, which is very common for sensitives. And so I actually kind of usually combine that throughout the whole day. I've always got, if I'm not, directly speaking with somebody, I've always got sound on. I would say not so much music, because my go-to is actually nature sounds, and sometimes that'll have maybe a piano or violin or something in with it, but there's a lot of just you know wind through the trees or the rolling brook, or things like that that are on all the time for me. And then when I'm just decompressing and I'm not focused on anything, then I'll have other music on that has lyrics and things like that, that is always very soothing, or it could be energizing, but it resonates with me. Because like most sensitives, if you have music going that you don't resonate with, it's like fingernails on a chalkboard, right? It's just, you can't ignore it, and it definitely creates a big dump on your system if you're just like, I can't, can't go there. So of course it's always going to really resonate with me. I love to watch I don't watch TV so much, but I'll watch different platforms that have interviews and things like that that are uplifting or help me feel more spiritually connected to source, that kind of stuff. I love to hear about, like ancient civilizations and how different people did things then, and that kind of stuff, and kind of work that around with, oh, okay, yeah, I can take this from there and this from there. And again, stuff that resonates and is uplifting. Those are the things that I would do, like evening wise as a go-to. I mean, I have my dog. I always, I do daily dog walks, and that means going to the river and in the trees. And those are the places that I really, it's also where I can create, if I'm going to write poetry, or if I'm going to be writing something. I'm not a musician. I love music, but I don't create music, but I'll, create other things. And when I'm out in nature, it tends to flow more. But it's also just, that's my main recharge, is being in nature. So anytime, if I'm feeling like I need, like, oof, I need a bit of a break, I need to do something, then I'll go step outside and touch a tree, or just walk around, walk down to the river and be in that nature space. That really, really helps me. And I do meditation every morning, and that helps me, set the stage for the day. And then throughout the day, I just make sure that I have my little breaks, and I check in and make sure everything's going well and I don't need anything, extra. And then I always make sure and I recommend this highly for all sensitives, to, especially in the morning, do not wake up and immediately turn on the news, or, even check emails that are going to have any of that kind of stuff. Wait till later. And then for me, all I do for my news source is I have a daily newsletter from the New York Times, and it just has bullet point, like, these are the top headlines, and it'll have a little blurb on there. And then I can go through and decide, do I want to know more about that one? And then I'll research it. And otherwise, they just all kind of fade away. But I don't actually, like, I know a lot of people come home from work or be done with work or whatever, and then they turn on the news. And I don't do that at all, because that, as the majority of everything is not happy. And it's just a major downer. So I will not put my head in the sand, but I'm discriminating on how I get my news and how much and what I do with it. So I tend to do more seeking out, listening to certain people on Substack or something like that if I want more information, but not inundating myself with the hype and all of that, the kind of stuff from the news. And then I always make sure that I shut off devices and anything that I'm really having to focus on that could get me kind of stirred up, at least an hour before bedtime. so that there's time for me to calm and be heading into my sleep time from a place of calm. And so I make sure to be, not answering emails, not doing anything that takes a lot of brain power. I mean, I do word games and things like that, so I might do that in that last hour, but I'm not going to do anything that really I need to make choices about, or that's going to get me all riled up, before going to bed.
So, as we start to wind down this conversation, I've got one more question that I ask all of my guests, very general question. What one piece of advice on any subject would you like to leave with the listeners today?
Oh, on any subject. I think the main thing would be just to honor and listen to yourself, whether that's making a decision or deciding if you want to have someone in your life, there's a potential friendship or something, or whatever it is, just honoring that your body knows, your system knows, your soul knows, whatever, and giving it that honoring to say, is this good for me? And if it's not, taking that step to say, this is what I need, and how am I going to get those needs met? So really honoring ourselves.
Well, that's a good piece of advice to wind down today's conversation. So, our guest today has been the Calm Coach, Tammy Goen. Tammy, thank you so much for being here today. I appreciated this conversation.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me.
Please go to my website at podcastreallife.com for more information about my guest and the things we discussed today, including a link to her website. That's it for today's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another chance to learn from each other. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.